Our next speaker is Dr. Vincent Carroll, who is a medical doctor. He's spoken out a lot over the last several years, and I'm delighted to know him as a campaigner. He's a doctor, and I call him my friend as well. I'd like to just have everybody show gratitude for Dr. Vincent Carroll, because when we didn't have a venue just a couple of days ago, he came down here and he booked this room for us to use and are hosting us today. So big gratitude to Vincent. Excellent, there you go.
For that clap, I'm going to give you all a choice. And the choice is between two reports that were published in around April of last year. One report is called the Transcare Ireland report, and the other report, as we well know, is called Dr. Hilary Cass report. There are two different reports. The first report, the Transcare Ireland report, was authored up by two people, a Professor Quilty and a Dr. Matt Kennedy, who's the advocacy manager at Belong To. Now, in fairness, he is declared as the advocacy manager, and that is fair, and I support the publication of all reports on that report, and I have a perfect right as a person who's able to read reports, to read the report and to critique it. And I've read that report and I've dismissed that report for the very simple reason it does not reach the academic rigor, as far as I am concerned, of the other report I've asked you to compare and contrast and select, which is the Hilary Cass report. Let's have a look at the drift of the two of them. You decide, I won't decide. You decide which one you have confidence in. The first report, as I said, is written by an advocacy manager, which is perfectly okay. I mean, advocacy managers advocate. That's their job, and I support that as a job. But Professor Hilary, Dr. Hilary Cass's report, which was commissioned by the UK government under the auspices of the NHS and has now been accepted without any, embraced in its entirety by the Labour government in the UK, by the Conservative opposition under whose watch it was commissioned, and more importantly by the academic bodies within the UK, such as the Royal College of General Practitioners and the academic body that oversees all medical education in the UK, plus the Royal College of Paediatricians and others. They have embraced the Cass report, and the Cass report, as we know, sets a gold standard in medical practice. It is beyond reproach. I say that carefully, and I say that having thought it through as a report. It is beyond reproach. It is rigorously academic. It's been 4 years in the making. It is unchallengeable as far as I'm concerned. Now, there are bits and pieces that some of us disagree with, and I accept that, and that is fair. But the broad drift of the report can be summed up in a number of words: an abundance of caution. The principle of precaution, we do that all the time. There's nothing unusual about being cautious about things. It is the way society normally operates. And if a young person comes with an element of gender confusion, it behoves us to apply the same standards to that child as you would to any child. You would give an abundance of caution when a child presents to you. So, for example, what does that mean in practice, an abundance of caution? Supposing if that child believes that they're born in the wrong body, the recommendations of the Cass report is to buy time. The recommendations of the Cass report is to allow the situation to develop onwards, so that when that person becomes much older, they will be much wiser and be able to make a much more mature decision. So in other words, we're talking about demonstrating an abundance of caution. We're talking about not advocating for social transitioning, because the report tells us that social transitioning is not a neutral act. When a person socially transitions, they're at the beginning of a pathway, and that pathway can lead on to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and ultimately irreversible surgery. And at the end of it all, after your surgery, if you decide you made a mistake, as far as I can work out, you remain unsupported, dumped and there's nobody around offering you any useful advice because you betrayed a narrative. You're meant to be happy if you undergo your transition, and if you do undergo it and now regret and say, can I go back the other way, which probably isn't surgically or medically possible, you're left stewing where you are. And I'll be honest with you, that's grossly unfair. That's wrong, because how can a young person give their consent to that, to life-changing situations? And I believe that to be very, very wrong. So now going back to how did we get there? Well, we got there through, I love using the term, I suppose, BC, before CAS, and post-C or AC after CAS, because the landscape in medicine changed dramatically, pre-CAS to post-CAS. Before the CAS report, you had what was known as the WPATH report. The WPATH is an organization set up about 1979. And it's a combination of academics, doctors, but activists. And activists sort of set the agenda. And that's the trouble with the WPATH as an organization. It stands for the World Professional Association in Transgender Care. And every now and again, they issue updates, which are special bulletins of one type or another. And curiously and interestingly, and I would say tragically, in the 2020 program for government, there was written in the small print into that program for government was a commitment to stick to WPATH as a method of bringing in transgender care into Ireland. Now, since then, the science has moved on and the CAST report has come about. And the CAST report, as I said, represents gold standard, represents medical best practice. But because of the program for government written up 2020, and because of the commitment to WPATH, which was inserted by the Green Party, government's hands were tied. They could have opted out of it, but that would have offended some of the Greenie people, and there was no desire to do that. Now, in fairness, the program for government, hammered out a couple of months ago, has withdrawn the WPATH. You won't find any mention to WPATH in it, and that is very good, because the hands of professionals, the hands of the medical people involved in this line of work are no longer tied. Now, within the political scene, there's probably a tying down of ideology, and I suppose things move slowly forward. But what we don't have now, I'm glad to say, are the hands of doctors tied into a program of government, the WPATH. In other words, we can look beyond WPATH to the CAST report, and the CAST report needs to be embraced because of that. But let me go further and say that the CAST report is not just about what doctors may or may not do. The CAST report is for each and every person. It's for every sports club. It's for every youth group. It's for every school. It's for every sports club, Sunday school, any group where people come together for whatever reason in order to or young people might come together. The CAST report can be the gold standard which the governance of the organization of the club will or the school actually goes by. So there's no earthly reason why a school or a sports club cannot say, we embrace the CAST report. That is the report that we will base our guidance policies on for young people who might present and say, I believe I'm in the wrong body, or for a parent who might say that I believe that my child, will you use different pronouns for my child? These pronouns do not align with the biological sex of my child, but my request to you, teacher, my request to you, superintendent of the club or whatever, is that you use those pronouns. According to the CAST report, if you do, you're not displaying an abundance of caution. If you do, you're not doing a neutral act. You may be setting that child on a pathway to puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and irreversible surgery. So in other words, in 10 years' time, that child comes and says, look, I was given this advice by you, and now look at where I am now, and I regret what happened. Damages. Who's going to pick up the pieces? Who's going to pay for the enormous damages to a child who's been surgically mutilated, now infertile, and is utterly and totally regretful because of advice that they were given by somebody not qualified to give that advice? Supposing if that was a person who was in charge of a club, or superintended a Sunday school, or was somebody headmaster in a school, or if it was the boards of governors of a school, or sad to say it, the patrons of the school as well. What would happen there, I wonder? I mean, when that child is seeking damages. I mean, if you or I got into our car this evening, and we are insured, I should hope, and decided to drive down the wrong side of the road just to see what would happen. Or, we're not sort of doing best practice motoring in that case. Would our insurance company cover for us? What if we'd advise a child going against best practice medical guidelines and saying, no, forget the cast report. Don't go down the route of best practice medical guidelines. Go down the other route, Transcare Ireland 2024, and advise on social transitioning, advise on setting the child on a pathway that might lead to an area where they deeply regret. If the choice of the teacher or the youth club leader or whatever it is goes deliberately, willfully, and not in ignorance, in full knowledge, and everybody must have full knowledge of the cast report at this time, if that person goes forward and if the decision is made to send that child down that particular pathway which is contradicted by best practice medical guidelines, who pays the bill? Who takes up the tab? Where does that child, does insurance cover for that? What about the individual teacher who said, an individual teacher or youth care manager or whatever can say, I was only obeying orders. Did we not hear that in Newmanburg sometime before? I was only obeying orders. You cannot say that. You need your individual responsibility. So be you a teacher, be you headmaster, be you on the board of governors of your school, or be you a patron, a bishop who might be a patron of the school. I mean, again, you have individual responsibility, and if you've responsibility, therefore, if mistakes are not mistakes, if advice is given that is willfully wrong, contradicting what we all know now as best practice medical guidelines, I'll be very blunt about it, you are responsible for the damage, and you will pay, and pay in finance, pounds, shillings and pence, and that's the way it should be, and that's the way it will be. So I'm sending out a broad warning to all youth groups, schools and everybody else that might be involved. Be very careful in the advice you give. First of all, ask yourself the question, are you qualified to give that advice? Secondly, should you seek further guidance from those who are qualified to give that advice? And thirdly, do you really have to give that advice? Think carefully, because if you don't think carefully, you have responsibility. You have ethical responsibility, but you also have medical responsibility, but you also have a financial responsibility if you don't watch out. So be very, very, very careful. There is the advice that I would give. I mean, we are now in the post-CAS environment. 4 years of rigorous academic research is not going to be repeated for the next 10 years. So it's the CAS report or nothing. It's as simple simple as that. That is the report that exists. That's where we are now. And we have no choice. If we like it or don't like it, we have no choice but to accept it. And that means not only doctors, not only schools, it means youth clubs, it means absolutely everything. And for an example, a small group of people who occupy a different medical code called the Acupuncture Council of Ireland, they have at an AGM embraced by free vote of the membership, embraced the CAS report. I want to see the Irish College of General Practice. I want to see my own Association of Public Health Doctors. I want to see every youth group, every group you can think of embracing the CAS report, because there's no reason why you can't. In fact, you have to. There is no choice. So folks, there I leave it, and thank you very much indeed.